Welcome to Insider. I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV News. This week, we're diving into a sobering but urgent question. Are Jews still safe in America? Our conversation comes just days after a Molotov cocktail attack at a Colorado rally for Israeli hostages left several people injured, and only weeks after two young Jewish diplomats were murdered outside an Israel event in Washington, D.C. These are not isolated incidents. From college campuses to city streets, anti-Semitism is surging. And yet, where is the outrage? Joining me to unpack what's happening and what it means are veteran journalists Ruthie, Blum, and Dan Perry. Together, we'll explore whether this is part of a historic pattern, one where Jews are welcomed and then turned upon. What comes next for American Jewry? Is this the time to stay and fight, or is it time for Jews to think about leaving? Let's get started. So Dan, I want to start with you, okay? We have seen an incredible rise in attacks and now violent attacks. Have we reached a moment where Jews are no longer safe in America, not on campus, not at rallies, maybe not even in their homes?
Maayan, I don't think it's binary, safe or unsafe. The Jews are clearly less safe. It's getting worse and worse all the time, and the reasons are many. I am the son of Holocaust survivors, and I've lived in Eastern Europe, and I've seen real anti-Semitism. I've seen people who believe that the Jews have a map that gives them the secret to dominating the world, and they think something supernatural is happening with the Jews. That's anti-Semitism. It's a factor here, but it's also, I believe, driven by things that are more practical, specifically hatred of what Israel's doing in geopolitics. And the Jewish association with Israel, is it fair? Is it unfair? You can debate that point. I think to totally divorce the situation of Jews in America from the actions of Israel is infantile, because obviously so many Jews identify with Israel and they're very loud about it. I think it's underappreciated. I think it is approaching a breaking point where it's intolerable. If it should continue this way, I wouldn't be surprised to see greater interest in Jews leaving the United States. And there's another issue, which I think often goes unspoken. The U.S. is changing before our eyes. Why did the Jews not leave Germany in the 1930s? Because they felt like what would eventually happen was inconceivable. They didn't imagine that it could possibly happen in their beloved Germany of Brecht and, of Wagner. Mm-hmm. Americans also think that complete madness is impossible in America. But I fear that the political realities in America along many dimensions, what's happening on the right, what's happening on the left, the fact that the political leadership of the U.S. is what it is right now, which to many would have been inconceivable at the level of a Simpsons cartoon 20 years ago, America's changing, and I'm not sure anything is any longer inconceivable. So I would certainly be very, very, very worried. And I think we've yet to see how bad it can get, but it's getting pretty bad.
Ruthie, I want to hone in on something he said, because he mentioned the fact that this is, tied, that we have to separate traditional anti-Semitism, quote unquote, from what we're seeing now with anti-Zionism. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Not really, because it's true that anti-Semitism traditionally, it's, Jews have horns, they control the world, etc. But that doesn't mean that this other type of anti-Semitism is any less anti-Semitic. The trick is that whereas before, when you were talking about the Nazis, you're talking about the far right and white supremacy, etc., and today that's intermingled with global jihad. And I don't think it has anything to do with this hatred of Israel and Jews. The reason I think that they're interconnected, that I don't see that the political system has anything to do with it. But what American Jews have in common with the Jews of Germany, and you mentioned this, this is the country of Brecht, etc., is that American Jews who are very liberal, and most are, and most vote for the Democratic Party, don't believe that they're the kind of Jews who everybody's talking about. And especially if they're critical of the policies of the Israeli government, they think that they're immune to this kind of hatred. But that's where they're wrong. And the same thing with the Jews of Germany. It didn't matter how cultured, it didn't matter how German, it didn't matter. They didn't need to have side locks. They could be the most cultured, but they were marched into those crematoria just like everybody else. And I think that's what American Jews have in common with those Jews of Germany. Not that I think that's going to happen in America necessarily, okay, but I don't see Jews in America believing that's going to happen. And even if they do, or even if they express concern, I certainly don't see them leaving and moving to Israel.
Well, let's go back, 80, 100 years. We talk about the situation as it was in Germany. And history is very cyclical. I mean, we have seen, not just in the Holocaust, but, every generation before that, that Jews have felt comfortable and then have been expelled. Or there have been the Crusades. There's been a number of incidents every 80 to 100 or so years where Jews that were feeling pretty good no longer could. Is it possible that we really are hitting this critical threshold where Jews in America might not see it, but will eventually have to leave? I mean, Ruthie, what do you think?
Well, they may eventually have to leave, and I don't know. And it's hard to judge how close that is or if that's actually going to happen. What I'm saying is, whether or not that's a possibility, I don't see the Jews I know leaving America to move to Israel. And at this point, if you're talking about where they're going to move, to Europe, I mean, there's anti-Semitism exploding all over Europe, so I wouldn't see that either. I don't believe it. I don't think that people who are comfortable financially and who don't speak a foreign language, and Hebrew is a foreign language, whether they learned it in Hebrew school to read the Bible or not. It's a foreign language to them. I don't see people who have already are established in their careers, and are set up financially and have elderly parents or young children or a whole combination.
I understand, but the question is more history, cyclical. Are we going to see this happen again?
I don't believe in magical cycles.
Okay.
And I think that so much of modern life is unique right now. In some ways, history only began 100 years ago because there were no democracies anywhere. Okay. Over 100 years ago, no women could vote anywhere. We didn't have the same communications infrastructure. So people, even if they could vote, were voting based on ignorance. Today, we know everything. So many people are empowered.
We also know a lot of fake news.
Well, of course, and soon most of the internet will be written by AI. In fact, I believe it's already the case. So we may be in a unique moment with its own unique dangers. There's a number of things changing in the nature of anti-Semitism. Anti-Israelism, anti-Zionism, I think it's all mixed up, however you want to define it. The danger to Jews now comes from the left and not just the right. The right, the hatred of Jews, the white nationalism, all that.
That was the more traditional anti-Semitism.
It was more traditional, and right now you have something weird happening in the left because of the Jews' association with a global privilege and this nonsense about colonization, and it's coming from the left. Two things, or three things. One, identity politics isn't helping the Jews right now. The idea that you shouldn't be targeted, no matter what kind of Jew you are going to be targeted, that only works if people are obsessed with tribal identity. Identity politics coming from the left, oddly, as much as the right now, is driving things in that direction. No matter what kind of Jew you are, you're going to be hated by people who hate the Jews. Secondly, violence used to be mostly the domain of the right. Violence is now very much justified by obsessive people on the far left who, again, driven by the hatred of certain identities, and their extremeness, the extremeness that is fed by social media, will justify violence against a group that they dislike. Thirdly, in America specifically, you have something that was not the case. It's not the case in Europe, and was not the case in Germany in the 1930s. You can buy weapons like you can buy bubble gum. So if everyone's justifying hatred against the Jews, and hatred against, so many people are in the right and the left, and hatred against the Jews is driven by identity politics and is caused by actions of Israel, in part, actions that are indeed disliked by a lot of people. And so many people have weapons, that's obviously dangerous to any group that's going to be hated. And right now, beyond the standard issue garden variety hatred of Jews, you have a lot of it being driven by, the world's most publicized war, and a very brutal one happening in Gaza.
But why is the American government, which seems to be so pro-Israel and pro-Jewish, I mean, Donald Trump is certainly taking many steps, he claims, in order
Trump
to
is not pro-anything.
Well, to fight anti-Semitism, he's certainly taking many steps, and the FBI has obviously opened investigations, but it doesn't seem to be truly being taken as seriously as it could be. I mean, I'm just thinking back to Ferguson, George Floyd, the society, when they saw something going wrong, came out to the streets, even, in mass protest in order to defend these people. And here we've had now a Holocaust survivor literally burnt, walking down the streets, a young couple walking out of an event and getting shot point blank in the back, and nobody seems to be protesting it.
Look, we're talking about Israel. No one's protesting. You don't have mass protests in favor of the Jews because the political landscape does not lend itself to that. Who's going to protest? The far left, generally the source of protests and idealism, hates the Jews. The right wing is right now, I fear, using anti-Semitism in vain. When Trump goes after Harvard saying it's anti-Semitism, he's really doing something else. He's anti-higher education, he's anti-DEI, he's anti-progressives, and he's using anti-Semitism as a cudgel. That isn't real. The right is traditionally anti-Semitic itself. I don't see this becoming a big cause célèbre in American politics.
Ruthie, respond.
Well, I of course disagree with that because I think that DEI and all of this, and critical race theory, I think that those are the cover for Jew hatred, not the other way around. I don't think it's an excuse. It is all based on this intersectionality and the marriage, the green-red alliance between the Islamists and the communists, or, communists, or socialists, or far left. This odd marriage because, after all, all of these gays for Gaza, etc., they would be thrown from rooftops in Gaza itself. So it's an odd alliance, but what it shares is this hatred of Israel. It's an excuse, basically, because it has nothing to do with Israeli policies. And although Dan said, this publicized war, of course, there are other wars, and nobody cares about them, right? Because this is the Jewish state. This is an incredibly
it's a
just
democracy.
war. Yes?
You expect more from a democracy than what's happening in Gaza.
You expect more from a democracy, and Israel lives up to that despite the lies and the slander. This is the most just war, and I believe that the Israeli army is the most ethical army, and therefore the lies spread about it are that they have a purpose, and the purpose is to say, we hate the Jews, we want to annihilate the Jewish state, but what we'll say is that these are policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his right-wing government.
So I actually think it's very interesting what you're saying, because Ambassador Mike Huckabee, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, actually made a very strong statement over the weekend where he accused CNN, I think it was the Associated Press and the New York Times, of actually feeding really this blood libel and being the catalyst behind a lot of the violent attacks that we're seeing take place. Do you buy into what Ambassador Huckabee said?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the media outlets do contribute to it. I don't think you can blame them. I think that they definitely contribute to a climate, an atmosphere, and they don't wait to check any facts. And once, as Winston Churchill said, a lie travels around the world before the truth gets its pants on, or something like that. And we see that, especially with the internet. I actually heard somebody criticize, I've heard this on TV recently, that it took the army, the Israeli army, a good 7 hours to refute the lie that Israeli soldiers were firing on Gazans going to the humanitarian aid stations. It did take them 7 hours, but you see, this is what you have is asymmetric propaganda warfare as well, because the Israeli army actually does investigate. It's easy. You can just sling mud, you can throw out lies, but the army doesn't then say, no, we don't lie, we investigate. And it takes a while to do that.
So, Dan, you had a very prominent role at the Associated Press. Do you agree with what Ruthie's saying, what Huckabee is saying? What is the role of media here at this point?
I cannot possibly agree with the statement that the media doesn't bother to check. The media is very, very much challenged by the fact that one of the two sides is 100% a liar and 100% an evildoer. It's because the media wants to be a little bit impartial and objective, and when one side is obviously completely evil, that model somewhat breaks down. I think the media has been at times credulous about numbers and claims put out by Hamas and its ilk, but it's a very difficult situation. Is the Israeli army the most moral in the world that always investigates and never lies it used to be? But I think we would be very naive and we'd be doing the truth a disservice if we didn't see the change for the worse that's happening in Israel. I was a bureau chief of AP in Israel during the Second Intifada, I remember very clearly that the military was able to prove to us, and they tried to prove to us, that they were doing everything possible to not hurt civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. I remember one particular case where there was an indication that they were able to kill Abdelaziz Rantisi, one of the main Hamas leaders at the time, and they held back at the last minute for fear that they'd hurt some members of his family. Wow. Now, let's just say that that standard has moved in the direction of indifference.
And probably partially because of the chaos and the trauma of October 7th.
Thousands upon thousands of children, innocents, have been killed in Gaza. And it's not a lie that Israeli officials run around the world immorally and idiotically stating that there are no innocents in Gaza, and some people have called for nuclear weapons and all this horrible stuff that will land them at The Hague.
I want to take us back to anti-Semitism.
Much of the Jew hatred also comes from that.
Okay, so I want to take us back for a moment to the Jew hatred. When I was editor of the Baltimore New York Times about 11 years ago, there was a huge amount of anti-Semitism taking place in Europe at the time. It was not in the United States the same way. Of course, there was always rising anti-Semitism, but we really saw the hugest spike happen during COVID, right? And then at that time, everyone said, well, when there's a big pandemic, we need a scapegoat, so the Jews are an easy scapegoat, so that's why we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. Now, of course, we have October 7th. Now we say, well, it's tied to the war, because of Israel's politics. That's why there's a rise in anti-Semitism. It's COVID, it's the politics, but my real question is, why did America not see this coming? Because it feels like at least the American Jews or the American government should have preempted to the point of violence.
I totally saw it coming.
But nobody did anything.
I think a lot of people saw it coming.
But yet no one, did we just sat still?
What can you do when everyone has weapons and when a country is full of illegal immigrants? Many of the Muslims are going to hate the Jews. Oh. And by the way, anti-Semitism in Europe, please, again, I know and am extremely intimately familiar with the real anti-Semitism. The spike in anti-Semitism in Europe largely is coming from Muslims in Europe who have a beef with the Jews and who have a very violent side to their culture, clearly. So this is what's happening. And that is the source of almost all the attacks, for example, in France.
Ruthie?
Well, I think that America, it's not that America didn't see it coming. I think that America there was a climate created based on liberal values turned, on steroids that hated itself. It's anti-American. It's not just anti-Semitic. It is encouraging campuses. It's anti-Western, it's anti-American, anti-Israel. And as you pointed out, this lie about Jews being white and colonialists and Israelis being white and all that.
As if there's something wrong with being white.
Right.
You're right, it's anti-Western.
You mentioned George Floyd. Of course, if a black is killed, whether or not it was justified, wasn't justified, he was on drugs, he wasn't on drugs, there was a horrible scene. But the point about George Floyd was that it became the excuse for violent eruptions, looting, shooting, whatever you want. And had he been a Jew, it wouldn't have inspired that same hysteria. There would have, of course, been arrests, etc. But the reason being that in America, and this happens in Israeli society as well, there is a view, it's patronistic also. It's saying, these people are lower than we are. Jews are higher. You can punch up and you don't punch down. And I think that that's where the real racism is. I don't think, actually, conservatives, I'm not talking about extreme right-wing people. Conservatives are not racist. I think that radical leftists are, because they focus everything on race, and they think that legitimate targets are white. Now, that is racism. And that's why I think, and America created that climate.
Well, I couldn't agree more that the left is guilty of a form of racism and what I was calling before the obsession with identity and tribalism, and they kind of apply collective punishment, in this case, weirdly, against whites. But I'm not surprised that the George Floyd murder led to mayhem, whereas attacks on Jews won't, because the context is different. The experience of Africans in America has been a very, very unhappy one. They're still economically underprivileged and socially, weirdly, still marginalized, despite being like 15% of the population. It's a real problem. There's a lot of anger, and so obviously it can explode in violence. Most of those riots were done by blacks. The Jews are in a different position. The Jews are successful in America. The Jews are not inclined in America to go around rioting and looting, obviously.
So we only have about 2 minutes left, and I want each of you to give a final sentiment. Dan, if you could give a message to the Israeli government about what they can do to help curtail or stop the anti-Semitism. And then I want to just go to Ruthie. And Ruthie, I want you to give a message to the American government. 1 minute long each.
Look, the only thing Israel can do right now is to stop the war and behave differently. I think the Israeli government is a factor here. I think if Israel continues to go in the right religious direction, the American Jews will not only not come here, but they will stop supporting Israel and want nothing to do with it. Whereas if Israel reverses course and becomes, again, what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, I think there is a chance that many American Jews will end up moving here. And if they do so in sufficient numbers, it won't be to a place with a foreign language, because just as Israel's full of Russian speakers with their own culture, that Israel could be truly the 51st state. And oddly, as always, immigration to Israel will have then been driven by anti-Semitism in the various origin countries. That is why Israel exists.
Ruthie.
Okay, so first of all, I totally disagree. I will give a message to the American government, but first I'd like to say, no, what can help alleviate anti-Semitism is for Israel not to stop the war, but to win the war. And my message to the American government is please enable or don't stand in the way of Israel's ability to win the war, not end it. End it when it's after victory, not before then.
How about end it quickly with victory?
I'd be happy for it to end with victory quickly. That would be the best, yes.
We cannot disagree.
And just to remind everybody, victory would be annihilating Hamas, getting our hostages home, and bringing peace to the region. Thank you both so much for being here tonight. That is unfortunately all the time that we have this evening. For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching Insider. Have a safe and pleasant evening.